And our top story, listen to the Gipper. Now, whether you're for Kevin McCarthy or against him, an open battle between Republicans, it's not helping either faction carry out their prime objective, and that is stopping the drift towards woke socialism in this country. You don't accomplish a mission that big by forming a circular firing squad, yet the two sides have reached a level of animosity where they're literally calling each other terrorists and then saying, but he started it. It's not the kind of leadership that inspires confidence, even among 11-year-olds. Maybe it's time for both factions to take a page from President Ronald Reagan's book. Reagan reversed a leftward drift in this country that, like today, had led to a stagnant economy and the loss of respect for American power and traditions. The changes he and the Republicans in Congress implanted turned that country around, and that change lasted for decades. Of course, he didn't do so without opposition within his party, but he gathered them all together by adhering to something he called the 11th Amendment. Thou shalt not speak ill of any fellow Republican. Well, now, obviously, times have changed. Social media and the political culture it spawned, not to mention our last president, changed the rules. But adhering to Reagan's 11th commandment moved the conservative agenda past the goalposts in the 80s. So maybe Republicans could take one from the Gipper. Think of the broader goal rather than any sense of entitlement. Work things out in private and come out publicly with a unified plan of action. Ronald Reagan also used to say, quote, there's no limit to the amount of good you can do if you don't care who gets the credit. He had that saying emblazoned on his presidential desk. We suggest both sides take that saying to heart. The mission is too important to let egos ruin the moment. Of course, the question is whether it's already too late. Joining me now is Wall Street Journal columnist and Fox News contributor Kim Strassel. Kim, great to see you. You know the Beltway like nobody in the world. How do Republicans straighten this out?
Well, they should listen to your advice, David. I can't agree with you more. You know, one thing that was interesting, people noted that Donald Trump came out this morning and said, vote for Kevin. That's what got the headlines. But I was more struck by the other thing he said in that tweet on social media where he said, take the victory. And
yes.
This is the thing that just completely astounds me, is that, look, you know, these guys who are unhappy, I can see why they've been unhappy. Congress has been dysfunctional for so long now, mostly under Democratic rule. Decisions are made in back rooms. Committees don't work. The rank and file, there's no amendment, no debate, there's nothing. They fixed that. All these rule changes that McCarthy has agreed to is going to result in one of the more transparent, functioning houses of representatives that anyone has seen in a very long time, including me, and I'm old. And so that's like remarkable. Why don't they take the win and then go get down to the people's business?
Well, first of all, you're not old. You weren't even born when Ronald Reagan was saying the things I was talking about. But let me just put up on the screen. That's not true. Let me just put up on the screen for you exactly what you were talking about. The tweet, or actually not the tweet, the social post of Donald Trump.
The truth.
Yeah, the truth. Here's what he said. Vote for Kevin, close the deal, take the victory, and watch crazy Nancy Pelosi fly back home to a very broken California, the only speaker in U.S. history to have lost the House twice. Now, a lot of the rebels claimed that Donald Trump is their guiding force behind what they're doing, but he's for Kevin McCarthy. So how do they justify that?
I was really struck by the degree to which they completely ignored his advice today. And I'm not entirely sure yet what that means, if it's some fading influence in the party, or if it's simply that these guys are now so dug in that even, the suggestion of Donald Trump is not going to permeate their position. But I think that is actually very concerning too, David, because where does this go from here? And we're just adjourned for a bit. We're going to be coming back, and their intention seems to be to continue holding vote after vote to prove with each one that they're not going to move and that McCarthy doesn't have the votes. And I'm just not sure that they are open to any more discussions.
Well, let's talk about the damage that's been done, because, in fact, it's both sides that are lobbing grenades at each other. We had the Congressman Bacon and Congressman Crenshaw both saying some pretty foul stuff about the rebels themselves. Congressman Bacon saying that they are Taliban 19 and 20. Even, no matter how this resolves itself, how do they straighten out those animosities?
Well, they've got to figure it out somehow. And, maybe the hopeful scenario, I'm always an optimist, David, is that they do get past this somehow, and then they start to get some victories where they work together on the floor, and some of this gets mended. But none of this is productive. Okay, we expect our members of Congress to behave better than this and to maintain some civility, and that goes back to what you said about Reagan. Circular firing squad, why are we fighting with each other when there are so many problems that need to be addressed? And it's something, both sides need to take that on board at this point.
Well, and both sides, let's face it, are for that same mission, the mission of stopping the leftward movement of this country, not only in terms of economic policy, which is bad enough, but in terms of the position of the United States in the world, the loss of our traditions, or even spitting upon the traditions of the United States, all of those things, the social stuff that's going on with the woke movement. I mean, those are the things that could bring those two sides together, getting rid of the supersizing of the IRS, et cetera. Clearly, there are more things that bring the two sides together than those things that divide them, right?
Oh, yeah. And by the way, conversely, if these guys continue to remain dug in, people are increasingly going to turn to some radical proposals to try to get out of this stalemate, which is going to damage the Republican Party in potentially unknown ways. Look, people are talking at the moment about changing the threshold at which you get declared speaker, lowering it. Okay, that's one thing, but if you get your math wrong, you can end up with Hakeem Jeffries as Speaker of the House, even though the Republicans won the election. We're now having Republicans talking about doing deals with Democrats on the other side of the aisle, giving away Republican subpoena power, or potentially putting Democrats in key positions on committee in order to get their aid and help to elect, by the way, someone who's not even Kevin McCarthy to the speakership, someone that Democrats approve of. This is not, and none of this is helpful to the Republican Party.
But, in deference to the rebels, I have to bring up the point, that's what they're afraid of with Kevin McCarthy, is that perhaps he doesn't have as stiff a backbone as he's going to need.
Yeah, no, and look, like I said, I think that the biggest issue that they put forward were some of these changes to the way that the House is managed. And look, they got that, okay? If they're concerned that Kevin McCarthy is going to be making all the decisions and that he's going to make bad ones, they have significantly diluted the power for that to happen with these rule changes. I think the other thing they need to consider, too, and this goes back to my point about taking the win, which is that there's a possibility that you end up a scenario where there's somehow Kevin McCarthy is put in or someone else is put in, and they get none of those changes that they have so far negotiated with McCarthy in this rule package, and that the way that Congress has functioned doesn't, in fact, improve. And that's, again, take the win.
Well, meanwhile, Florida's Governor DeSantis is kind of using the chaos in the Beltway to power his own image in people's mind as a national leader. He spoke yesterday, very strong, kind of a barn burner speech to his Florida audience, but it also was meant to go beyond the Florida audience. Let me play a sound clip, get your opinion. Roll tape.
Florida's success has been made more difficult by the floundering federal establishment in Washington, D.C. This has caused many to be pessimistic about the country's future. Florida is proof positive that we, the people, are not destined for failure. Florida has led the way in preserving what the father of our country called the sacred fire of liberty. It is the fire that burned in Independence Hall when 56 men pledged their lives, their fortunes, and their sacred honor to establish a new nation conceived in liberty.
Now, DeSantis did a few things there, but the main thing he was doing was separating himself from the chaos that people are seeing within the Beltway and saying, I'm an answer to that chaos, no?
Yeah, no, very smart on a number of levels. And by the way, putting aside the question of, Ron DeSantis' likely presidential bid and, where he falls and the stakes of all of that, one thing that is very notable is you started this segment with Ronald Reagan. And, one of the reasons Reagan was successful was not just because he marshaled his party together, but he was the former governor of California.
That's right.
And he was able to point to successes that he had there. And, in the history of the United States, too, we have had a lot of governors who are elected because people like to be able to see that someone knows how to have that executive experience and make it work at a state level. But the other thing that came into mind as I was watching that, David, is I think actually the DeSantis contrast sort of explains a little bit what is happening in Washington. The Republican Party is without an obvious leader at the moment. Some people might say it's Donald Trump, but obviously that idea has changed in minds of many Republican voters. And when parties are out of power, when they don't have someone in the White House, they do tend to become a little bit more chaotic and in the wilderness because there isn't anyone there imposing some discipline or giving them some guidelines or leading them in policies. So some of this is not so surprising, but it's still disappointing to see. Yeah,
you make great points. And again, the main point, I think, is Kevin McCarthy is not auditioning for the job of the presidency. He's not auditioning for that major job of the person who's going to guide the country for the next couple of years. This is the head of the House. It's one position. The presidency is held by Democrats. The Senate's held by Democrats. So he's got to negotiate between those parties. Whoever the next leader in the White House is going to be, if that's the Republican, that will be the person, I think, that sets the stage for what happens the way Ronald Reagan did. Kim, I wish we could talk more, but this was a great discussion. Thank you very much. Pleasure to see you. And we'll read you in.
David. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year. We'll read you in the Wall Street Journal on Friday. Thanks so much for being here. Can't wait for that.